Well, thanks for coming, you guys. We're going to start the talk this evening just with this short video that some of you may have seen, but it's been playing at the museum in Los Gatos in the front window. And it was made in 1990, and it was made by a local San Jose television station at the time of the beginning of the Bookmobile, which was, made for the San Jose Museum. So I like to show it, and you might notice that I'm wearing the same clothes almost that I was wearing in 1990. So would you play that, Julie?
Maggie, well, hanging high above the museum's new entrance, which I can see over here, is a special piece of artwork that was created for the museum by a local San Jose artist. And museum curator Colleen Boydovich introduces us to Tony May. He's not only an artist, but he's an art professor at San Jose State.
Tony May will be creating an installation in the lobby of the new edition. It will be an installation which refers to the history of the building. It will incorporate library books. Many people in San Jose remember the San Jose Museum of Art in an earlier life as a library. I think that most curators of contemporary art share my view that unlike curators that deal in historic material, we have the privilege of having the opportunity in many instances to meet and work with the artists whose work our museums show.
This particular piece was one that was sort of cooking in the back of my mind for a long time because I like to use puns in my work, and I had realized at some point that a piece made with books called a bookmobile was a rather good idea in a bad sort of way, bad pun probably, and so in my memory this building was of course always the library. It's kind of an indeterminate structure. In a way, it's almost like you could say it's like a toy. Having the controls on the piece from which the different books are elevated come out of the windows of the old building seemed like a good thought. I mean, I wasn't sure where I was going to operate it from originally, and then I realized I could operate it from the old building. So it seems to work for me fairly well to link the old building with the new building. So the books are designed so that they can be each individually raised or lowered. And in so doing, the network of pipes that connects them changes shape, and that's really what you notice in the space. So I was sort of doing this piece in a way, I designed it to sort of pay homage to the standard sort of Calder mobile that a lot of museums have hanging in their lobbies.
Well, I showed that because I thought that sort of explained a whole lot of stuff, but then the rest of this talk is going to be about basically how that piece, how I got to that piece. And I'm, in hindsight, you can sort of see linkages that you might not have seen before. I like to start my talk always with this photograph of the farm where I grew up. And this was taken way before I was born, though. It's a lovely photo that was taken. And you can see that the people were there standing out in the yard. They were actually ready for this photo to be taken. So this was a cool place. This is actually the photo taken of the place where when I was a kid. So this was probably taken from the 50s. And this is a current Google shot of the Google Earth shot of the farm. And as you can see, unfortunately, it was purchased several, times after I left there by several other people. But the last guy that bought it was this well-intentioned hippie who has basically let everything go to rack and ruin. So you can see the roofs are in need of repair. And then I've gone through, indulge me, I've gone through a bunch of old photographs, and I found this picture of what I believe is me hanging from this trapeze. And I thought, now this perhaps prefigures some of this obsession that I seem to have had with hanging things. So I thought I'd throw it in. My dad built this piece of equipment to this kid's place. So he was very, very skilled. And I guess that's the other thing I like to say. I think I didn't really want to be a farm boy, but I did learn a bunch of stuff about building things while I was there. So I'm going to throw in a little bit here about what I studied when I was in college. I spent a lot of time studying ceramics, and I did a bunch of ceramic stuff. These are some pieces that I did. And I worked with Don Reitz for a number of years. He's very famous. So these are some little ceramic pieces. This is one of the few ceramic pieces that I ever did that I actually sold to a local store in Madison. That was a chessboard that was kind of complicated, pretty large scale. And then I did quite a few sculptural pieces in ceramics as well, but was ultimately rather frustrated by the ceramic medium, especially when it came to making anything of any large scale. I had, ideas that I should make large scale pieces in ceramics like a lot of other people, but making abstract sort of sculpture pieces in ceramics, I often had failures. They weren't firing right. They would collapse in the kiln or something. So I also spent in college many years in painting classes. I took an awful lot of painting classes. This is a self-portrait that I did as an undergraduate. And this is a photograph of me, one of the photographs that was taken by my friend Richard Fry, he was my compatriot, and we both thought that it was important that we take publicity photos, so these were photographs of Richard and me, more or less in the beatnik tradition of looking cool or trying to look cool. This was Richard, and this was Richard on the parapet of this building where we lived up on the second floor, reading, I noticed, Brave New World. And this is me coming out of the cupboard sort of thing. Anyway, and this is a painting that I did then around that same time as an undergrad. And I think it shows, the tortured mental state that I was going through at the time, and state of deep personal confusion maybe. But anyway, you can also see that it was pretty much inspired by people like, some of the California figurative painters, and a little bit of Diebenkorn, a little bit of what's his name from Stanford, you know who I mean. Anyway, this is a painting that I did about that same time. I think I was a senior, and this painting actually got me into a show at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, which was quite a fluke, but it was also a bit of a coup. So, and you can see the splatter painting. I was really into that, trying to make that work. It's another painting from that time. The inside outside views seemed to be important to me, and putting things in boxes was important too somehow. Then I was exploring other formats for painting, as were many other people. You have to remember that there were so many people trying the same kind of things at this time. But so here I was painting for a time on alternate formats. And then this is a painting that was done on the lids of 3 bushel baskets. That, I was also always collecting things from the street. And so for my stretcher bars for this one, I used stretched the canvas over 3 round bushel basket lids, and that kind of connected up with. And this piece, again, a lot of these are not very successful as paintings, but they were kind of exploratory. This one, the shapes that you see, these curved shapes, they were actually the front sections of drawers from an old bureau that I found on the street. It was a Victorian chest of drawers, and the fronts of the drawers were curved like that. And I had a new table saw, so I ripped them into those shapes and used it to stretch a canvas. So I was moving into stretched canvas, and didn't really know what to paint on the canvas. That was becoming more of a problem. And this, Chris Daubert might recognize, and Dana might recognize this little display case that was incorporated into this painting, because they now own it, and it was used for various other art pieces. But I was trying to combine painting and sculpture in this time, make these paintings that also had 3-dimensional parts. This one was kind of cool. This was a 2-sided painting, a fully sculptural painting that had stretched canvas poking out of both sides. And then this one probably came about when I was given a number of little small suitcases by my father-in-law, who had a lot of sample cases from when he was selling various things. And so this one was kind of inspired by, you know, the greeting card that when you open it up, something pops out of it. So this was like a three-dimensional painting kind of thing. And then this piece actually won me a prize in the student art show. This was called the Butterfly Trap, and it was again a found object that had these hinged parts, and then I added more hinged parts to it. And then I was, for some reason, I think I was kind of inspired by just plastic film at that time too. So I did a couple things with plastic film. This piece, some of you probably have seen. This is the one that's in the museum collection, the awning. And this piece was actually in my graduate show. So, and then the small one, I believe that came first, and then the larger one followed that. Anyway, this is the piece that I always think of as quite important and seminal. This is still in existence, and this was a suitcase that was given to me by my ex-wife's father, and it was a display case for storm windows. And I decided that the challenge was to figure out what I could put inside that and have it turn out to be a rather large scale sculptural piece. And again, in this case, probably the sculpture was somewhat inspired by the constructivists, you know, who were making these very geometric, very pieces. So I was always borrowing ideas from, you know, every place else. Here's the replica or reproduction of the early piece that I made with just the stretched canvas that collapsed. So these are the first collapsible pieces. And that's that very same piece in my graduate show. And so you can see I was beginning to work a lot with fabric at this point. And it was the same kind of technology that I had used when I was stretching canvases. It was just that I stopped painting on the canvas and I started just stretching the canvas. This is, of course, a piece of art that was done at the time when, you know, minimal sculpture was becoming quite popular. And I always have to show, like, well, yeah, this is my friend Marcel Duchamp, who was pretty influential in suggesting, you know, that a person's whole art career could be sort of collapsed into one box. And I think I took a lot of inspiration from that. This is one of the few pieces I made in my first year of teaching in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. And it was just 9 stretched panels that were hinged together in a bunch of different ways and could be made into a variable construction. So then these really become the beginning of all the variable constructions. For some reason, this John Chamberlain slide always decides that it wants to flip sideways. But this is a John Chamberlain piece, and I throw it in because John Chamberlain was, you know, making these abstract sculptures, and they were all made of, you know, portions of auto bodies, that, you know, collapsed auto body parts and stuff like that. And so that was kind of very popular sort of abstract expressionist sculpture at the time. And I rather enjoyed those, but I always thought, well, yeah, it's nice to have one of those, but it would be nice to have one that wasn't just always the same shape. So I decided to try to make variations make sculpture that could be changed. This is one of the very few inflatable pieces I did, which was not terribly successful. But, and some people thought this was somewhat phallic, I believe, but I doubt it. And then this one here is, these are a little bit more lyrical, I think. So I started trying to figure out what I could do just with a piece of cloth and vary that cloth by the way that it was hung. And so I made these frames, overhead frames, and they were kind of like they're somewhat related to puppet theaters, you know, where you would just change the shape of the thing, and that sort of looked like there was a little table there, and that one was some kind of abstract thing, and this is kind of like the bird in flight, and, you know, all these things were possible. And then from there I moved on to making the same kind of things, but with fixed support points. Is this too boring? I'm getting bored myself.
No,
It's not boring, Tony. It's
wow.
great.
Keep going.
I could tell if there was an audience there responding.
Watching.
Anyway, so I made a few of these pieces. These were just fabric again, but here the fabric was held in from, in this case, 16 individual support points. And it was as if the fabric was supposed to be the center of attention, but really clearly the whole apparatus that operated the fabric was becoming more and more really what I was interested in. And I thought maybe it was equally interesting to the viewer. So the other problem with these pieces was, of course, when I showed them, they were in galleries and they were operated by the viewers in the galleries. And that was cool, except a lot of times they ended up being just a tangled mess, you know? So that remained a bit of a problem, allowing viewer participation. This is that very same concept, only applied to a specific location. So this was one of the very first really site-specific pieces that I did. This was at City College in San Jose in their faculty lounge area. It was an atrium outside in part connected to the faculty lounge. And Mary Alville took these photographs of me operating the piece. As you can see, it exactly filled this atrium, which was 18 feet square. And it could also completely block off all the light to the atrium. So, and this atrium was adjoining this faculty lounge. And I don't think the faculty enjoyed very much the fact that I was messing around with their light source in this room. And also, quite interestingly, that piece, since this was in the winter when it was done, it also collected water quite amazingly. And then, you know, when it was operated, and this is how it was controlled, it could drop down these torrents of water. So it was, you know, it was really interacting with the space. And I quite liked that piece, although it had a lot of problems. Shortly thereafter, I got invited to be in a show at Ghirardelli Square in San Francisco. And this was Michael Wall's gallery at the time at Ghirardelli Square. And you can see this is me here, right here. We had to get up on top of the Ghirardelli Square sign for this poster, which is pretty cool. It was pretty fun. Anyway, I don't know, I was very audacious. And so we were asked to choose, you know, a site for outside. And there was this fountain there by Ruth Asawa. And I chose that as the site for my piece. And it's quite a nutty idea. I don't know how I managed to even allow them to let me do it. But anyway, so this became the site for the piece. And I designed this structure that would be suspended. Here's Paul Steiger, by the way. And I can't remember this guy's name, this other guy. But he was one of my students and one of my helpers. Sorry. Jim, I think he was. And there's my son, Ian, at the time. Poor little kid. He had to spend all day in the hot sun watching his father do this crazy nut job. But anyway, the idea was that I made this perch that was supposed to hold what would resemble a sugar cube. And it was going to be sitting right on top of the water jet when the water was turned on in the fountain. And there was this netting overhead like a snare trap. And there were so many problems with it technically, because you know, that square, we had to support this overhead structure from really far points away in the square on, you know, the tops of buildings. And the damn thing kept sagging so much that it kept getting closer and closer to the top of the fountain. So it never really was properly elevated. And it was jerry-rigged, but it did manage somehow to become quite dramatic. The day after, we actually worked on it all day, and then we came back the next morning, and it had the sugar cube, which was actually a salt lick, had been dissolved, in fact, and the trap had been sprung, and the whole thing had come down on top of the fountain. And you know, it was like it was just a performance piece, really. It only lasted 24 hours or something. I throw this in now as a junction with a lot of the upcoming stuff that I will show you. This is, of course, a piece by Bill Wiley, who, as many of you may know, he just died a few days ago. And I feel so sad that he has died. He's a wonderful artist, and he was very, very influential to me and many other people. And one of the main things I got from him was that, you know, it was possible to be quite, you could involve some humor in your work and yet at the same time be quite serious about it, which he did so beautifully. And then he played with words so cleverly as well. And then this is another piece that I throw in because this is a piece by Bruce Naumann, who was a colleague and a classmate in Madison when I was a student at UW. And this is one of his pieces that was done from, you know, like about the late 60s, I guess. And it's not one of his more well-known pieces, maybe, but this piece really amazed me. I thought this was so beautiful, and I was so jealous of it because what it was he had dumped all this flour on the floor of his studio and then swept it around, and he called all these different photographs, he called them simply flower arrangements. And I thought that was just too good to be true. And I was very jealous, actually. But it sort of led to, I think it opened me up to a bunch of other possibilities and playing with words. So this was that piece that I did that was called Drawing to a Close. And it was a case, you know, that hung overhead, and then you could draw on these drapery cords, and draw it as if you were drawing the drapes, and back and forth and so on. And then that led to a show that I had at Hanson Fuller Gallery, in which I had 5 pieces in the small gallery, and 4 of them were hanging. And one of them was this sort of sensory deprivation chamber. It was a square box made of just hanging fabric, painted fabric, very, very complicated to make. And it had like a little corridor. You would go in and then make a right turn and make another right turn, and you'd be inside this tiny little space where it was completely black. But I liked it quite a bit, and I couldn't figure out how to fit it into the show, of course, and particularly until at the very last, since the show that I was doing there was all called drawings, but there weren't any things like works done with pencil and paper. They were all plays on the word drawing. And this got this sign that just said draw conclusion. And I show it because I remember that Bill Wiley went into this space and he played the saw inside this little dark, absolutely light box, light-free room. So it sort of made it very, very wonderfully special for me. This is another piece that was in that show. It was like a fireplace. Here you see it from the side only, but it was connected up to the window well, and it drew air up through it, right? So it was drawing, it was like it had a draft, as a fireplace has a draft. And this was the piece called The Drawing Room, where you could draw the drapes around this frame and close it off and isolate yourself. That led, shortly thereafter, I was fortunate enough to get this show at the San Francisco Museum, and I really had to gear up for that. And so it was a 4-person show, and I did this piece which was called Variable Construction Altered by the Chance Rearrangement of My Living Room Furniture. And I think my daughter might remember that piece a little bit. She would have been very young. But anyway, so this was one side of it. It was like this H-shaped structure. Oops, wrong way. And then on the other side was, again, one of these hanging panels of fabric. And the thing that made this one seem kind of especially good to me was that the furniture, when the furniture was moved around by our family or other people living in that space, the figure on the shape of the thing on the other side would of course change, but you wouldn't be able to see what was going on. And so it took away the deliberate purpose quality of changing the shape, and it made it seem more somehow a metaphor for the interconnectedness of everything, I suppose. So I thought it was a pretty decent piece. And then we shift to the next medium, basically books. I mean, how we're going now from variable constructions to to this other element in the bookmobile, obviously. And I started working with books a long time ago also. This was one of the very first pieces that was called the Good Reading Lights, or maybe these were called book track lights. I think these were book track lights. And they were done for the hallway in my house. And did an awful lot of stuff with books. These are 4 paintings of 4 of the pieces that were done with books. This was a painting of a lantern that I made of a book of poems that happened to be called Lanterns of the Blue that I found somewhere. And this was the bookshelf, of course, and this was the result of back-breaking labor, which actually broke the spine of the book by having all these folds. And there's another Good Reading Light. And these are bookends, of course, literally. And I was always very fond of just, you know, puns that were so bad, so stupid, and yet hopefully profound in some way. So this is a more recent iteration of that piece. I finally made a nice display box for it a couple of years ago, the bookends piece. Here was a couple pieces, 3 pieces. One was the table of contents, which was a small card table with a glass top that contained many, many tables of contents from a variety of books, and the Good Reading Light. And then this had also the Reader's Digest condensed book floor, which was a very large piece of several hundred varnished Reader's Digest condensed books in a frame. And then this is another piece that I did that involved some kind of serendipity, I guess, which is another thing that I have always been fond of. This was a boat that my son and his friend found in a ruined condition in the creek near where we were living, and brought it home. And it was in such a state of repair, I left it for a couple of years. And then finally one summer I decided to rebuild it. And I did, but in order to try to make it seem like I wasn't just wasting my summertime, I tried to make it into an artwork. And just by chance, I discovered that I had 2 identical copies of Robinson Crusoe already in my bookcase. And, you know, it was from one of those things where I would go to Goodwill all the time and I would see Robinson Crusoe. I would see a book or something. I go, oh, I should buy this because, you know, my kids would like to read this. And then I probably did that several times. But other times I go, oh, I should buy this. My kids would like to read it. So I happen to have several identical copies of Robinson Crusoe. So the other thing that was serendipitous was that it turned out that I was able to mount the entire Robinson Crusoe book on the inside and outside of this book. It had almost exactly the right amount of surface area. And there I was on the percolation pond. Here, the bookmobile, I mean, not the bookmobile, but the Robinson Crusoe boat, it got under so many layers of fiberglass that finally you couldn't read it anymore, which was too bad. This was one where Lonnie Tomono actually was very expert at fiberglassing things, and so he sort of coached me on this fiberglass, but we put way too many coats of fiberglass on it, I think. But this is a fairly recent painting that I finally finished of that boat. And here's where the boat ended up. Somebody bought it from an auction at the ICA and they took it to their house in Lake Tahoe. And this is all I know about its current location. They sent me this photo, but I never met them. I was always hoping they would invite me to come and visit them, but they never have. So I don't know who these people are. Here was the book roof test. There was some books that I decided I should try to see how they would function as a roofing material. And turns out they didn't last that well. This was probably the same piece about 25 years after maybe 20 years of exposure to the elements. It was a process piece, finally came. So then I got invited to be in this show at 80 Langton Street. I think Judy, what's her name? Oh, damn. I'm sorry, I've forgotten her name. But anyway, I got invited to be in this show. And I had to come up with an installation kind of thing for this. So we came up with this idea of a book-related piece once again, Judy Moran, Randy Pritikin's wife. was the person that got me in this show. And so this was held at this place called the Knights of the Red Branch Hall. It was an old fraternal organization's hall. And I designed this piece to go on the facade of the building. And so here we are installing these books on this is a variable construction, variable book construction with implied solar function is what the whole title of it was. Here we are, and this is me and Chris Dobert on the ladder. And can you believe, I mean, we were up on there's Bob Jones, he was one of the helpers, and I had other people helping me, of course. We were up on this fire escape, on the front of this building on Mission Street in San Francisco, installing these crazy heavyweight contraptions. We don't seem to have been nervous about climbing at the time at all, huh? I don't know what that was about. Anyway, so there's in progress installation. Here it is finished. And here you see close-ups of the books. So when the books were all open, they would reflect all of the heat. They would all reflect, they would be silver, and they would reflect all of the heat. And when they were closed, they would be black and they would absorb heat. So the idea was that they would help to warm or cool the building, which of course was just silliness because it didn't have the proper exposure for optimum solar relationship. But it was just a nutty piece. But it also it was also used like a signaling device. You could send all sorts of coded messages from the facade. And I like the fact that it was pretty site specific, and I kind of like the fact that it looked like it had always been there or something, or like it was part of some kind of building remodeling that was done, inappropriately in the 50s, where they covered up the windows with some mechanical grid. And then this is another piece that I showed quite a few pictures of. It got fairly elaborate, and it also relates to site-specific kind of things that I like. This was a piece that I did for a fountain in downtown San Jose, which at that time was kind of a really, derelict area. It was just devoid of most things that nice downtown should have. Most of the old buildings had been torn down, but there was this brand new fountain, and it was located right where San Antonio Street used to be. So it was called the San Antonio Fountain. And of course, my name being Anthony, I had always had this connection with Saint Anthony. So this piece was called the Milagro de los Pescados, the miracle of the fish. It was to commemorate the famous legend of Saint Anthony, who was supposed to have given a sermon to the fish when he was failing to convert the heretics, and the fish all came up to listen to his sermon, and as a result the heretics were all amazed and they were all immediately converted. So I had to figure out though how to design a whole bunch of fish that would float at a proper angle with just their heads out of the water. And here's Lonnie Timono helping install that piece. He's a good friend from Hawaii. And here's some shots of the piece. So here's kind of a detail of the fish. Each one was individually weighted, and it had to be, they were ceramic and they were fired, and then they were weighted with buckshot and polyfoam, expanding polyfoam, and they were moored to these concrete little blocks in the bottom. And it was pretty effective. They didn't always keep floating the whole time it was there, but most of them survived, and they ended up being on the mantelpieces of a number of my friends afterwards. I think there were 28 of them. And so there they are now as a preserved in museum type setting. Here's another piece that I got to do with Bob Jones. Bob Jones was actually the first person that was invited to do this residency at Cap Street, and he invited me to join him, so we collaborated on this. And I forget what year that was, but anyway, so our idea was we would convert the David Ireland house into this house that we called Functional House. And it was supposed to sort of disguise the house as if it were almost a commercial venture of some sort. but the functional house sign malfunctioned. And so a lot of times actually Bob set up this whole system of individual switches on each one of the letters, in the functional house sign. So individual letters could be turned on or off. So you could make a lot of different words or little slogans from this. It could be like fun house, obviously, or functional. I don't remember what else. But as you can see, this had this little piece up on the top here. And there's me up on the roof next door installing this little periscope mirror. Essentially, the functional house was, well, several things. Bob did separate things, but I was focused on mostly setting up all these periscope-like mirror relays. Here you see a mirror on the corner of the house, and the image that was relayed by that mirror was coming from a playground across the street. And all of those images were then collected in this fake fireplace inside the house. It was very complicated. It was like like a 3-month residency, I guess. And we had like a month and a half to do what we were going to do. And then it was open for a month or so, and then we had to tear it all down. But quite interestingly, so Bob had a piece way in the back garage, which was a simulated table saw with words on the blade. And then I did this painting later, how the image of Bob's saw was relayed to the false hearth, to sort of sum up the whole thing. So this is kind of similar to what I've liked to do throughout my life, is do a painting of something to keep a record of something. Here you can see the mirror in the fireplace, which was relaying information from about 6 different relay points in the house, different places, through the upstairs bedrooms, out through windows, into the hallway, et cetera, et cetera. Finally, we get to the books of the Bookmobile. So how are we doing time-wise? Are we running up? I really had thought about doing something with books at the old San Jose Museum building before they did the new edition. I had this idea that I would do this, make just one single book that glowed in the dark, and it would be hung in the old part of the museum, right about where the book stacks had previously stood. But and it would just hover there, kind of ghost-like. And I wanted to make sort of a ghostly book, but I never did that one. But then when I got invited to do that installation at the museum, this old idea just came out again. So this was like a first attempt at a experimental bookmobile thing. And there you see it reflected in the window. And here's this is a fairly recent painting. I decided I should document that and keep a record of that primitive early bookmobile prototype. But I did quite a few other, attempted more Calder-like things with books, but they never quite worked out. And then finally, it just dawned on me that, oh, this is going to have to just be another variable construction with books. And so, but it kind of really worked pretty well. And it was a lot of trouble because the ceiling of the atrium just had these 8 predetermined hanging points. And I still don't quite understand this. I have to explain that actually this particular bookmobile was only suspended from 6 points, even though there were 9 books involved. So 3 of the books were like dummies, like they had no individual ability to be raised or lowered. Unfortunately, that was kind of what we had to work with. The components consisted in part of these, I always like these beautiful clear or green plastic grapes that I found at Goodwill stores, that were popular at the time. People like to cast these grapes in resin, and they would all end up at Goodwill. So I thought they were quite beautiful. So here's the maquette that's actually at the NUMU Museum in Los Gatos. This is the piece that they recently acquired from Mr. Burkhart and his wife. And here's the Here's the installation at the San Jose Museum, the original installation, which I thought was surprisingly beautiful. I don't think I really knew that it would be quite this nice. It was more theoretical, you know, that it would be sort of interesting. And I didn't really realize that the structure of the pipes would be the most interesting part of it, probably. And it you know, it makes all these figures that are sort of like, you know, Joseph Albers drawings or something, all these three-dimensional spacey sort of things. And the other thing is that in this original installation, it was able to occupy that much taller space. So that was like a 30-foot high space. And later on, it you know, it got reinstalled. I'll show you in a minute. In a space that had only half that amount of height. Here's one of the very few pieces of photographs of the piece that is in existence, other than pictures that I took myself. So it seems like the piece was never really much documented. But this was when Josie Callan was the director. So then the piece was put in storage for quite a few years. And then when I had to show my retrospective at the San Jose ICA, the piece was reinstalled there, and it had a different sort of presence there. It was fairly successful. And then here it is finally being reinstalled recently, more recently at San Jose Museum. They reinstalled it about 2 years ago, but only for a fairly short amount of time, I think about 6 months. But went through a great amount of trouble to reinstall it, and we chose to install it in one of the stairwells. So it had only half the vertical clearance of the original. And so this is the crew there installing that. And you see they had to rent this amazing amount of scaffolding, cost them I think about $2,000 for installing this piece, just for the scaffolding. And we had to redesign a whole overhead wood framework. So I went with Rich Carson and we designed that together. But the thing that was really good about this time was, for the first time, the piece was able to be suspended from all 9 points instead of just from 6 points. Here's Jerry Yasukawa on the left, who was a former student who was working there. And I've forgotten the name of this other guy. But so that was the installation. And here's the way it looked then when it was installed. What I had done was I had found these old doors on under the freeway on 2nd Street, and I dragged them home. And so when I realized we needed some kind of a special, different way of mooring this piece, I built this piece. And so the piece then changed tremendously, huh? It was no longer site specific to the original building. And so it no longer referred so directly to the library that had been in that building before. But the mooring station actually took on a character of its own. And I was quite pleased with all of this color interest. And actually the ropes from the piece complicated it visually in some ways too, that again were not completely you know, pre-known, but they became very interesting. We had to do various things like redirect the on-site. We had to redirect the orientation of the ropes, just because in this stairway kids would have been able to reach the ropes, you know, and they would have been able to mess with it. So we had to kind of restructure the whole thing. So there's a lot of stuff that went on just on site as we were installing. And there we are, and there we are showing it to a bunch of kids at the museum. And there the kids are doing it themselves, and they quite enjoyed it. And that's about the end. I'm just going to show you a couple pictures of what I built at my place. This is what I've been working on more recently. Another little building project. Here's another painting of it. Here's a photo, a little video of me. I'll just save a couple of this. I
for
mean,
posterity.
this was me working on this something about a year ago. I'm still working on that. And then the final one is some tools. And then this, I think this is my ending one. Yeah. I always like this photograph. It seems like kind of summed up pretty much everything.